list I talked about earlier. And if it does not get into the look-aside list, actually sometimes just the first keyword of the object is not changed. And therefore, when it tries to execute a virtual function, it will still run the old code of the virtual function. And you would not know that this application is vulnerable to dangling pointer vulnerability. But as an attacker, you can still use the exploitation techniques and exploit it. So I do not have a good way to detect this kind of... Yes?
During the demonstration, you were rather careful to not close the crash window.
Yeah, that's right. So the question was, why was I careful not to close the crash window during the demonstration of the remote exploit? I did that because once I click on the application crash window, I actually terminate the application, and it will not be able to execute my newly inserted virtual function when it is terminated. So.
Two questions. First one, you make use of the look-aside list in your exploit to steadily locate specific amount of buffer in your exploit. That's the first question.
Oh. So, actually, I am too not a native English speaker, so I had a hard time understanding the question, but I will be happy to discuss this with you. Yeah, you can try to repeat it, but if I will not understand it again, I would like us to talk about it afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, the first question is like whether you use some technique to specifically allocate a fixed amount of buffer in your exploit.
Yeah.
You need to do that if you want to feed the look-aside payload. So whether you use that. First question, right?
I would suggest we talk about it afterwards because I didn't get it. Yes.
Why would the destructor be called again to exploit the runner code? I saw the net stop and then the destructor is called again. That's what.
Yeah. Okay. So the question was, how can I rely on the fact that I get the destructor to be run after I implied the last exploitation technique I talked about? It was the look-aside exploitation technique. Actually, I think that the application, after it uses an object, it will eventually try to deallocate it to run to destructor. So you might say the destructor was already run when the application the object was first deallocated. But if the application made use of this object again, I think it will try to run the destructor again. Sometimes it can be a bug of this nature. Yes.
I have misheard you, but did you say that you didn't use either of those three exploits in the demonstration you just did?
Yes.
What did you do?
No, okay. So the question was, if I did not use any of the exploitation techniques I talked about, how did I do the remote exploit? That was the question?
Yeah.
So actually, researching the IIS 5.1 web server, I searched for a lot of allocations inside it, and I found another allocation besides the configuration item I showed you earlier that actually I use it to to exploit this vulnerability using the double reference exploitation technique. But besides this allocation, I found another allocation, which is of a very specific nature. I will not talk about it right now. This is actually detailed in the white paper that we published, and I'll be happy to discuss it with you after the presentation. No, I did not use any. Yes?
Does your white paper talk about the protection mechanisms you mentioned, like the NX bit and ASLR?
The question was whether the white paper describes that defense mechanism I mentioned, the NX bit and the ASLR. And the answer is that there is very good material about this kind of protection mechanisms on the net. So I do not describe it fully, but you can find very detailed explanations about it over the internet. Yes?
Could you at least remediate this problem by looking at it as a C++ runtime bug and change the C++ runtime where it would do that cleanup for the allocation? No matter who's calling it? Well, I guess you'd still be stuck with a denial of service potentially, but at least nothing works.
Yeah, so the exploitation techniques I talked about are very specific, not to C++, but to object-oriented languages, unmanaged code, the object-oriented languages, like C++. The remediation that you suggested might make us not able to use the exploitation techniques I talked about. But every time you try to use you try to use an object after you deallocated it, it's a bug. So it doesn't matter how you look at it. Yes?
Does ASLR actually protect against the look-aside technique, or because you aren't using static? You said that technique doesn't need static pointers.
Yeah. So actually, in the exploit summary, I talked about it. I said I do not need to find a static address. So that's the answer.
So ASLR would not work in that particular case.
Yeah, it would not defend the ASLR will not defend an application that has dangling pointer in it when the attacker uses the look-aside list exploitation technique. Yes. Can you speak up, please? So the question is that between the allocations I make the application do, can the application run specific code that will change the look-aside list in a way that it will no longer be valid, as I showed you in the diagram? Yes, the application can do this kind of things. Specifically in the IIS, it does not have many random allocations and deallocations of this size, and you can just make. So this can be a problem, but I believe not a very big problem, and you can handle it when trying to exploit using these techniques in a dangling pointer situation. Okay. Yes.
In all of your cases, you have to have local access to the machine, right? You have to have local access to the machine to be able to do your exploit?
So the question was whether I had to have local access to the machine in order to do my exploit. So the exploit I show you in the demonstration, I did demonstrate it using local access, but I told you why I think this can be treated as a remote exploit. Because the only thing I did on the local machine was to turn down the web server. that will eventually be turned down anyway when the administrator will reboot the vulnerable web server.
But won't the heap structure change between that time?
What?
Won't the heap structure change in that time?
In what time?
Between you sending your exploit code and
Okay. So the question was, if I wait until the administrator rebooted the system, won't the heap structure change in the meantime? So actually, yes. I need to keep sending the last request I sent to the server in order to preserve the heap structure that I want to preserve. Okay. Thank you for being a great audience, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.